not far away. Let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Aloha, everyone. This is Larry Camp, and welcome to the Nobody Knows Your Story podcast, which just happens to come with a side of Hawaiiana. Nobody Knows Your Story is a podcast which I believe will impact each listener in a positive way. As you listen to the experiences that have transformed, shaped, and guided each guest, perhaps you'll better understand your own personal journey. Some will surprise, some will make you question, and some will inspire, but all will leave you in a better place for listening in. As for the Hawaiiana, well, that's just a big part of my life story. So I invite you to check in from time to time, or better still, add Nobody Knows Your Story to your list of favorite podcasts. You'll enjoy hearing the life experiences of people just like you.
A hard thing, 'cause every chance you get, you're trying to be a heartache. Try to slow down your tempo, my love, 'cause I'm not going anywhere. Won't you bring down this confusion and come and give me a solution? Try to me over, 'cause it's gonna take some time to try and recover. Well, I know love will help us through it all.
Hey everyone, welcome to Nobody Knows Your Story. And as the intro said, we will hear a story today, which I know will have a positive impact on each listener. Now, we just heard Maioli perform Rock My Boat, and mid-podcast, we're going to hear Livin' Easy from K-Bong. Now, my guest today is Zachary Liu, and we're going to hear some of the events from his life, which have driven him to, I guess, as he says, to, kind of fill big shoes. Now, before we get into that, though, I haven't really mentioned this before, but when I'm going to interview somebody for the podcast, have them tell their life story, I usually send them out a pre-podcast questionnaire. And when I got Zachary's back, I made a few notes. I always do. I look at them and I go over them. But one of the things I thought was interesting was that Zachary mentioned that his mom was really afraid of bugs. And so when he was, growing up as a young child, his mom kind of helped him with some books on bugs and things. So maybe so he wouldn't be so afraid. But that has kind of now taken him in a direction. I mean, who knew, right? But that's kind of how things happen. In our youth, we do things that sometimes manifest themselves later on in our lives. So we're going to probably talk about that a little bit. So Zachary, welcome to Nobody Knows Your Story.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. So was that introduction correct? Your mom talking to you about her fear of bugs?
She wasn't really talking to me about her fear of bugs per se. It's more so like how normally you get read like bedtime stories when you're little. I had that plus every other day she'd pull like an encyclopedia, go through all the animals, and she'd focus on the bug section because for her the idea was, this is the stuff I don't want him to be afraid of. She grew up in this village in southern China that had tons and tons and tons of bugs. So for her, being afraid of bugs was always like a pretty big part of her life because they were everywhere. And I guess when I was born, one of the things she wanted to make sure didn't happen was that I wouldn't grow up afraid of bugs. But obviously, then the problem is when you grow up kind of being exposed to that stuff when you're a kid, then you 5 years later, you're coming home with like frogs in your pockets. For me, I ended up just working more with bugs, even now in my like professional career. The nice thing is now she's not afraid of bugs anymore. just because of all the exposure. Like there are times in my life where you could go into the living room and there'd be 300 butterflies flapping around. But I think it's been a fun avenue in my life, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And like I said, that influence that your mom had with you there as a child and stuff, talking to you about bugs, and it was such a big thing to her. It impacted her on a daily basis. And so, yeah, she just wanted you to be more comfortable with it. I noticed that you said your mom grew up in China. You grew up, though, in Toronto, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So kind of talk about that a little bit. Talk about your early years and, how your family got from China to, I guess, Canada.
Both of my parents were from relatively rural parts of China. They have a fun story, actually. I think that, well, they were arranged to be married, and the reason was because my dad was one of the only people that got a scholarship to leave. Basically, he had the opportunity to go to the States, to go to Louisiana Tech. But the thing is, he's really bad with languages, and I mean in the sense where, like, his English isn't like super fluent, but also neither necessarily was Chinese. So my mom was kind of the other end of the spectrum. She was the person in the area that had gotten the highest, like, English scores, the highest Chinese scores all throughout school. And then so they put them together and kind of sent them off into the States. They were there for a couple of years. My dad worked for like an optic fiber cable company, like an optic fiber company. And then there was a big crash at some point, a big economic crash. I don't think it was '08. It wasn't the dot-com, but it was the one slightly before that. They figured, okay, well, normally you need to be sponsored by a company for like X years to immigrate to the States. And because his company had just gone bankrupt the time of reset, and they figured, you know what? It's easier to move to Canada. They don't have to do the entire wait all over again. And that's why they came here. I was born, I'm going to say at the time, my parents were relatively poor. It was us, a lot of extended families, so like grandparents on both sides, also two sets of uncles, like aunts and uncles and their families, and then like two or three tenants in the same house. For them, it was this like very big deal to focus on education. That's how they kind of left in the first place. And so I'm going to say that all throughout my childhood, I was in like I was in an environment where I was very much pushed to succeed, especially academically.
And I would say that that's probably not unusual, right? I mean, everything you just described, I've heard a number of times as people have come from, whether it's Korea or China or the Philippines. A lot of times, multiple generations will live in the same household, and that could go on for many, many years. I was talking with somebody who said that basically they all saved their money, and then the oldest son was able to get his own home. And then they kept pooling their money until the next son or daughter got their own home. And they did this until like 6 of these children all were able to purchase their own homes. To me, it's just a great way of taking care of family. And when you're growing up in that environment, Zachary, I'm guessing you had the benefit of obviously your parents, but you also had the benefit of being around your grandparents and, like you said, some aunts and uncles. Yeah, I can see how the education outside of the home would be a big part of it, but also just the education and the learning that goes on inside that home by having so many different folks influence you as you're growing up.
Yeah, for sure. That it's definitely a thing that kind of followed through, and there are obviously like negative repercussions of the Canadian housing market blowing up. Basically, that's what they did in terms of. I know at the beginning of like when they came here, just to be able to, because it's like a big cultural thing to own your own home, basically. And so they were at the point where they were borrowing money from like friends, from like their hairdresser. I think they borrowed a pretty substantial amount. Generally, all these things are like very large community efforts.
Like you say, it's important. It's important to have your own home. I mean, there is the status, I guess, with coming with your own home, but there's some benefits of having your own home too, as far as security and not having a landlord force you out or raise your rent so high that you can't afford it anymore. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. And so I noticed again in the notes that I've now mentioned to my listeners that I get, you talked about at some point, your folks did okay though. They turned their situation around and actually became pretty affluent.
Yeah, I would say my parents are relatively wealthy now, and I think a lot of that is in terms of just how persistent they were. I think a lot of it was also luck, just because like I mentioned earlier, like so my parents my dad was an engineer for a few years, and my mom was also working at the time, and at some point he started doing real estate on the side, and as that blew up with the real estate market here, that's what kind of pushed them out of like the really like going paycheck to paycheck to being able to afford like most of the things that they wanted in terms of like their lifestyle, right?
Hmm. So back to your youth again. I noticed that you had talked about, and this I don't get this from a lot of people, to be honest with you, but you talked about doing fencing and doing it at a pretty high level.
There were a lot of things that I was kind of like pushed to excel at. Some of these were like academics, other also like very stereotypically music as well, and I was also pushed very much into sports. Fencing was something that I picked up for several years. I see this as like I would say a pretty big impact in my life. I think I did fencing for maybe like 4 or 5 years, and by the end of it, I had been competing on like a semi-international level. I was. It's actually a fun story. I was chosen at some point or I was given the option to represent Canada in Europe in fencing competitions. At the time, I think I had enough imposter syndrome that I actually said no. And then at some point, I think what I enjoyed about fencing was, well, I was generally doing a lot of combat sports already, and then fencing happened to just be an extension of that. I had done Taekwondo for also a number of years at that point. And I think I enjoyed the camaraderie to some extent, like being able to see the same people over and over again, and I enjoyed the sport as well. Ultimately, what happened with fencing was that I think when people think about sports, what they don't focus on so much is like necessarily like the mental health components. It was definitely a lot of pressure on me, and it was. I'm going to say there were some components of the environment that were a little bit toxic in terms of the expectation to push for it. And it's a competition, right? So that's not always possible. I ended up quitting fencing after a couple of years, and then I think shortly afterwards, I started working on the business I do today. So the bugs.
Yeah, and I noticed that you said that the sports that you were interested in, Taekwondo and fencing, even though you might be part of a team when you go to a competition, those are still very individual sports. So when you talk about that pressure, the pressure to perform, yeah, if you're playing softball with 10 other people, yeah, you might make a mistake or you might do something well, but again, it's part of a team. So if you do make a mistake, it's not like all eyes are on you. In fencing or in Taekwondo, all eyes are on you. So I can see where that pressure would come from and why maybe there is a little bit of burnout after a little while.
Yeah, for sure. But it's still an experience that I don't regret. I think that it helped me I think it helped me with my character a lot in terms of just having to do because like at some points we were doing something like 15, 20 hours of maybe even 30 hours of sport every single week. And I think that at some point, like that builds a sort of discipline too. I think it's interesting because there's also like physical differences in the body. And one thing that I've struggled with, I want to say for the past couple of years, even after the fencing, is because so fencing is a very asymmetrical sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
You use one arm, you push on one leg, and you kind of pull with the other. You're always doing the same movements on one side, so you're always lunging on the same side. You're generally always extending the same arm, and then so I have a weird like muscle imbalance where it's really funny. I've like a very large like right bicep, and then I have a really large like right thigh, and then a really large left calf. But everything's all very like asymmetric. Where I've been working to rebalance everything, but it's funny the way it leaves. Um, I'm going to say like a physical mark too.
That's it. I hadn't even thought of that. That is very different for sure. Hey, so I want to switch up again. You talked about you used the term stereotypical musical background. So was it piano?
I did violin, and the story behind this is really funny. For my mom, right? Basically, she decided there were two options, or either it was going to be piano or it was going to be the violin. And the reason she chose the violin was because, from her perspective, right? Let's say I was trying to woo a girl. It's difficult to serenade them with the piano because you can't carry a piano around. But on the other hand, the violin, you can carry with you on like a case on your back, and I guess you can follow someone with a violin, like play them music throughout the day. I've never actually used this yet, and I don't think I will because I'm very rusty at this point. It's definitely it was definitely interesting reasoning. I've never heard it from anyone else.
And the discipline that comes from playing an instrument, learning an instrument, learning to read music. My folks were both into music, and they made sure that we all six of us, six children, played a musical instrument.
Yeah.
I played the French horn, and I played the trumpet, and my sister played the cello, and I had another two sisters that both played the violin. And so, yeah, I get it. And there is some discipline involved. And if you start then getting into sports, and I don't know if when you started doing fencing or taekwondo, if the violin took a back seat to that, or if you did them both at the same time. But like you say, at some point, from what you said, you're rusty, so I assume you don't play the violin much anymore. And I certainly don't play the French horn anymore and haven't for many years. So yeah, you do kind of move on unless that becomes maybe something that's going to impact the rest of your life in the musicals, like you're a part of a choir or a concert band or orchestra, something like that. So yeah, but the discipline's good. And I think that that's why your mom, wanted you to take up some music and I don't know who pushed you into the sports, but for us over here, it's usually our fathers.
I'm going to say I had a similar story there. I think which sport didn't matter that much, rather that I just did one just to make sure that I was able to, like, just to make sure I was I stayed athletic.
Mm-hmm.
I personally found the idea of fencing really cool. I think that I don't know anyone that doesn't find sword fighting cool. So
Yeah.
that just happened to be the one we ended up going down.
Well, let's get back to what you were talking about earlier about kind of the bugs and things. So, again, in your youth, you said you had a real love of the natural world and nature. I assume started early in your life, and again, has now kind of sent you down the path that you're on. So, why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So just for context for anyone that's listening here, so I run a company. It's called Canada Ant Colony, and basically we supply ant colonies to things like research organizations, to films, to pet stores even. And so it's become like a very large part of my life where typically I work a little bit in research in terms of insights, in terms of right now we're working on a project about the evolutionary origin of like how ants became social. But generally, I would say most of my time is devoted to this business where raising very, very large numbers of ant colonies and then kind of going around and figuring out who needs them. A lot of times we'll get different like requests from specific schools or for specific projects. That's always been something that's very interesting to me. It's given me the chance to work on like projects I didn't think possible. Like a couple of years ago, we were helping National Geographic with one of their documentaries called, or I guess more of a show. It's called A Real Bug's Life.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that at least I quite enjoyed. It evolved pretty organically. I mentioned before I was already keeping a bunch of bugs. I was trading with people, which now I realize is illegal, but at the time I didn't. I was trading like butterflies and stuff with people all across the world. And one of the things that I ended up landing on was ants, because I think ants are really cool. Ants, they have like such a range of behaviors. It's like the appeal of having a society on your desk, right?
Mm-hmm.
I worked a lot with ants. And the thing is, ant equipment is often very expensive. So I had built up a little network over time where instead of, for example, instead of paying for it, it would be a bartering system. I'd collect more of one, like a couple kinds of ants. I'd help middlemen like different deals. And in exchange, I would get like a small amount of equipment from that. And things kind of built on forward where, let's say I knew 10 people who wanted X species of ant. Let's say, oh, there's a lab that messaged me and they want 100 of X species of ant. Where I'd start, or it got to the point where it ended up just happening that using money was easier than, I guess, like the barter system. And so that business has grown over time. And now I employ a couple people in a little warehouse. And we've been working with, I want to say, people all over the world, and basically anyone that does work with ants.
I think that most people would be fascinated as they hear what you do, because who works with ants? I'm sure that's not a huge profession out there, but it's like many things. There are needs, and there are schools and projects and groups that study these things because it can convey into other parts of life, and it can transition into these things. And I think that a lot of times we just don't, unless you're affected by it or unless somehow you're involved in it, you just don't even think about it. So that is pretty fascinating.
I always think about like the little industries that people don't realize exist. Like for me, it's always really fun. Like when someone asks, "Oh, like what do you do for work?" It's like, "Oh, I farm ants." But and the thing is, when you think about it, like all of these little things, like there's people that like they'll devote like years of their lives to creating like a plant with a specific color pattern, or vice versa. And it's like all of these. I think it's interesting how obviously they're not very represented in media, but how we have so many people doing these little things for I'll call them industries that you don't think exist. But like when you think about it, yeah, like it makes sense that it's there. It's just surprising that to meet someone that does it.
And I know a guy that raises worms and does very well financially. So, I mean, again, until he explained that to me and I learned more about it, I wasn't even aware that was a thing. So there's lots of different ways out there to live a life and to, find enjoyment, because this is something that not only is your career right now, but it's something that you enjoy and that you've put a lot of time and effort into.
Some say in the summertime mind and your body and soul. It's a beautiful world, let the light shine through. Love for this earth and the ocean too. I'm waking up at the break of dawn, and I pick you up, I can hear you calling. Cause I don't wanna wait too long. On and on, it's time to come along. We living easy, and we're easy living. Open up your eyes, it's time to stop believing. Living easy, and we're easy living. We living easy, and we're easy living. Open up your eyes, it's time to stop believing. Living easy, and we're easy living. Easy, and we're easy living. Easy, and we're easy living. We're living easy, and we're easy living. Easy, and we're easy living.
I think you said that this may not be what you do for the rest of your life. This is just what you're doing now. So following that, what would be something else, Zachary, that might be something you would want to pursue down the road?
So I'll give a little bit of context. So right now I'm still 20, so I'm still relatively young. I've really been happy with all the work I've done with it so far, and with the business. But it's something I see myself doing in a couple of years, right? But when I think about what happens like a couple of decades from now, probably I'm not still like working selling selling ants specifically. I think that there's one thing that has always that I always been like passively afraid of, and I think this is pretty common. It's death, right? I think it's just scary, just the idea that at some point people cease to be, and it's always been like a worry at the back of my mind. It doesn't push too much for me. It doesn't affect my daily life too much. But it's like, well, like I wish it didn't. I wish it didn't have to happen. Well, I happened to be born, and I happened to be a young child when my great grandparents died, and so it's been something I've been exposed to ever since I was little. For me, kind of the solution to things was I'm okay with dying, basically, as long as somewhere along the way I'm able to make it a choice, maybe for someone in the future. So a lot of the work I've been doing on the side right now is, or a lot of the work that I'd like to do rather, is researching how to cure death. I actually work with one of the professors I've been taking lessons from at school. His whole thing is basically curing death, like creating natural immortality. And it's interesting seeing, I'm going to say, like, where the technology or the research is. Occasionally I'll see things like pop up on the news where they'll say like, oh yeah, like maybe within our lifespans, some forms of natural immortality will exist. It probably won't apply to the people that are already born in here now. But it's interesting to see, and based on like the research I've been working with, that like it definitely wouldn't surprise me.
Immortality does seem like a stretch, but on the other hand, when you stop and think about what has been, discovered, invented, just the last 20 years. I mean, I use AI. I mean, if I have a question about something, I just go and I'll ask it and I get a response within seconds. And it's just, who would have thought that? I know you're young, and I wasn't going to mention your age until we got a little further, but that's okay. But the only reason I say that is because I think you're doing and have accomplished quite a bit in the 20 years you've been around. For those of us who are older, there was a comic called Dick Tracy, and he would talk into his wristwatch. And this was, in the 50s and 60s. So to think now that that's an everyday thing, that's just an example. So I mean, on one hand, you'd say, oh, to live forever or, to be immortal. Yeah, not going to happen. I wouldn't say that. I just wouldn't say anything about almost anything anymore, because even though it may not happen, like you say, and probably won't in our lifetimes, who knows what the future holds? And I guess that's what I would say is, who knows? I think anything is possible.
Well, the thing is, like in some ways, all the processes that we need are already there, and that's a lot of the idea. Like, for example, like when someone dies, their body decays very, very rapidly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when someone's alive, that's generally not the case. So we know that the body already has systems in place that slow down like its own decay. Now, or for example, like generally, let's say from the ages of like 0 to 25, like are people aging? Yes, but are they aging in the way that people traditionally associate with dying? Not really. Are they becoming less healthy in like ways? Generally, the answer is no. And so the idea is that most of the systems that exist in preventing aging, or when I say aging, I mean like a deterioration in health over, like a natural deterioration in health over time. And the idea is that the body already does that for a lot of its life. Like for let's say the first like fifth, or let's say the first quarter, it already basically doesn't age. And then even for the remaining 3 quarters, it's obviously a lot slower than like the natural state of being than being dead and decomposing. We're at the point right now where there exists like consistent studies where a lot of researchers, for example, they've gotten like specific worms to live for 3 or 4 times their natural lifespan, or even mice to live like 2.5 times their natural lifespan. So we know that some of these things are effective. It's just a matter of time of figuring out how to bring that to people, right?
Right. And we do know, and we have learned that if you were to have certain diets, like the Mediterranean diet, it's a healthier lifestyle. People do live longer. But here's the thing, and I just had this conversation with somebody recently. It's quality of life versus quantity of years too. So for me, and I'm quite a bit older than you are, I would say I wouldn't want to continue to live if the quality of my life it wasn't up to what I wanted it to be. I think that that's a balance too. So sure, people want to live a long time. I think that, I mean, a lot of people have a religious belief that this is just part of an experience and they die and then they go on to another experience and they go on to do something else. But if you don't have that belief and you think, hey, this could be it, then I want to get the most out of this life that I can. There is a balance there. And, you were talking about 0 to 25 and how most people aren't really decaying or dying. Well, you know what? If they're eating nothing but fast food, let's just say you're going to be shortening your lifespan by the choices that you make, dietary. It could even be taking up smoking cigarettes or doing drugs or whatever, and you're going to shorten that lifespan. So again, quality versus quantity of years. So, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. And like you say, the studies that are going on now with worms or with mice where they're able to double or triple a lifespan. Yeah. Could that then be relayed to humans? Yeah, I would say it could.
Well, the thing is, I know you mentioned, I guess, the idea of living a long time versus having like being very comfortable during that time. Most of the ways that we're looking to right now, most of the ways of extending lifespan involve, hey, so that first like 0 to 25 years, where generally speaking, you're not losing significant like quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the portion that they're trying to say, okay, so let's say this happens, like process A happens, all the way until like X age. How do we extend that? This is still the craziest thing to me. I know my professor is working on like a couple patents for anti-aging drugs, and so like I anticipate that. I mean, obviously, I'm not the most informed person that you could speak to about this, but it does seem like most of the advancements are coming with like increasing your health span along with lifespan.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that people associate with aging or those last years, things like Alzheimer's, what it's looking to be is that they're not just associated with aging, but partially they are aging itself. They're like the last, like a couple systems failing at the end, where if you can extend lifespan, theoretically, those will have to change as well. or do change as well.
Or they would be delayed maybe further on, because right now, for the most part, Alzheimer's
Right.
affects people as they get older. And so if you can take the average lifespan from 80 years to 150 years, then maybe people aren't going to get Alzheimer's until they're 135 or 140.
That's exactly it.
Yep. Okay, so that's maybe a direction your career might take here as as you pursue different interests as you live life, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, everything. I feel like for me at the moment, everything's very uncertain. It's definitely very like a situation where crossroads everywhere, right?
Yeah.
We'll see how things go. You do mention AI, which I find really interesting. I feel like everything, like almost everything that people have heard about, like what AI isn't able to do, has radically changed every single year since probably for the past decade, right?
Mm-hmm.
One idea that's always like a little bit scary to me is that, like, what's AI going to look like in 20 years? Is there anything that, feasibly speaking, it definitely couldn't do? I'm not so sure, or I couldn't pinpoint a given thing.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to say how the world's going to change because of it.
Well, it's true. And I know it's scary to a lot of people because you always take a look at what could happen from a negative standpoint. You look at the Will Smith movie, where they had these robots and the robots gained enough intelligence that they then took over. And so I think that there are some people in that camp that think that could happen. And I'm not saying it couldn't, but I'm just saying that keeps people a little bit fearful of AI. But we're not there yet. And so right now, I think that there's a lot of good things that AI can do for us and help us do. Yeah, but yeah, it's like anything. We just don't know.
For sure. No, I agree with you. I agree with that. I just think we should stop giving them weapons.
Yep. So let me ask you this before we wrap up. You've been to Hawaii. What was your take on it?
Hawaii is really interesting to me because I'm the type of person that typically looks at things from like a very biology related perspective. That's just because of generally what I'm interested in. That's because of what's always really clicked for me. Hawaii is really interesting because it's so far and I guess it does apply to other things. It's so isolated and it's so unique from obviously the mainland United States, but also even like other parts of like Oceania or like the Polynesian Islands, right?
Mm-hmm.
I will also say that when I was in Hawaii, it was like one of the prettiest I've ever been. I always feel like it's a shame because, and this is something that I've noticed generally, is that when I travel around, I feel like increasingly like places are becoming the same. It is not becoming not physically smaller, but is becoming small in all of the other ways. It's becoming easier to go around. It's becoming like the people between different areas are more connected. Same thing with, for example, like what products you're seeing on shelves. Same thing with what animals you're seeing outside in the street. I think Hawaii is a really good example of this because it's so isolated. But it's always been like a little bit sad for me to see different parts of like the Hawaiian wildlife slowly be like replaced with like, let's say, wildlife from like other parts of the world, and it's losing a lot of its uniqueness. And I imagine that applies to also like a lot of the other, like, for example, like cultural components of Hawaii that are more unique, where as there's more integration with the rest of the world, I think that a lot of places begin to lose their uniqueness. I did think that everything in Hawaii was amazing, at least in the short time I was there.
Your observations are spot on. I mean, there are a lot of people, and this is not necessarily applicable just to Hawaii, but because I live in the American Southwest now, where we have a lot of Native American culture. So, you look at the Navajo language, for example, these languages are dying out. If people don't continue to learn them and use them, then they just disappear. That's what's going on in Hawaii. And there's been a kind of a revitalization of culture and pride in, Hawaiian. And so now you see Hawaiian immersion classes in schools. I interviewed somebody on my podcast a couple of years ago, Kalahua Krug, and he is a principal of a Hawaiian immersion school where everything's done in Hawaiian. His children speak fluent Hawaiian because it is going away. And it's, I mean, you drive down a street on Maui and you come around the corner and there's a McDonald's or there's a Ace Hardware or Kmart well, not Kmart, they're gone now, but you know what I mean? It's kind of like you were saying, you travel the world and you see a lot of the same things and it takes away some of that uniqueness. So yeah, you're spot on.
I'm going to give a little bit more perspective on this. So in China, for example, each region speaks tons of different dialects. And it's even the type of thing where, like, if you're somewhere and you go, what's equivalent to like a 2-hour drive. Now, a lot of times, if you're in a rural area, if you're in a village, basically, you'll find people speaking a completely different language. Like there'll be some similarities, but generally, just because you understand one doesn't mean you understand the other.
Mm-hmm.
At least in China, it's a thing where slowly it's becoming more or less like replaced by like mostly Mandarin and mostly Cantonese. For a very brief amount of time I was in Kenya. One of my roommates is from the area, so when he was going home, he offered to take me with him, so I did. Like they have something a little bit similar where for them, for example, most of the older folks speak like a tribal language, and then one generation down they'll speak the tribal language and like Swahili, which is and English, and then you go another generation down, and a lot of them are just speaking Swahili and English, and not like the whatever like dialect or tribal language. And I know that like these are things that also happen even like at like France. So like there used to be dozens of varieties of French that weren't necessarily like mutually intelligible, and it's just slowly kind of they've all been absorbed into one another. And then so you lose, and I feel as though you lose a lot of the identity of specific places just from institutions getting bigger, technology connecting people more, where originally, or because you're getting a lot less isolation because everything's so much closer to each other. Almost feels inevitable that they're going to become more and more the same.
Yes, 100%. And it is happening, and it's happening at a rapid rate. As older folks die off, sometimes so do some of those languages and some of those, the things that were part of their culture, they go away, unless people are being taught them. And a lot of times people don't want to learn them.
At least for me, I've always felt like some responsibility to do so. One of the things I definitely plan to is I have to learn the dialect at some point.
I think that it's wonderful for my listeners to hear, I guess, the interest and the excitement of somebody your age, because a lot of the people that are on my podcast are older. And so it's good. It's fun for me. And I know it's fun for the listeners to hear somebody that's young that still has so many years ahead of them, and then to hear the excitement and the interest that you have in these different subjects. So yeah, I find it very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So I remember when we had so the last time, this was years ago, when I went back to China for a funeral, basically, there's like a set of rites that you're traditionally supposed to perform. And it's especially for like the firstborn sons and the firstborn daughters. And this varies like from place to place. So like if you drive, like you go 100 kilometers, they'll have a different set of rituals, for example. And I remember because I happened to be in the line of like firstborn son, firstborn son, firstborn son, firstborn son. I remember asking like, oh, is there anything I'm supposed to do? And almost no one knew. They asked around. There were like 2 or 3 really old folks who were knowledgeable enough on like the rituals of the area to tell us. I was supposed to carry some basically a scholar's hat in the funerary procession, and part of it's because for a long time people just didn't live long enough to have that many generations down the line. But the other part is that because so many people leave, like that knowledge kind of doesn't get passed on. And I've always felt like a responsibility where I have to do my stuff, right? But I also have to learn that stuff. So like, you know what? Like, if it disappears someday, I'd like it not to end with me.
No, I get it. I mean, back to the Hawaiian thing again, they didn't have a written language, so everything was passed down orally and through chants and different things. If that doesn't continue on, or if those people that knew those oral traditions were killed in battle or something, it ends right there. Yeah, I mean, just hearing you talk about that, the way it's done over in China is just so different from the way it is over here. And there's, that's the other thing too. It's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just what your cultures are, and that's part of the beauty of travel too, is to learn more about other cultures. And I love to travel, and I'm doing more of it now that I've got more time to do it. So, well, hey man, I appreciate it, Zachary. Thanks for talking about your story and your life today, and sharing. I learned a lot, and that's part of the reason I like doing these podcasts. I love hearing the life story of people, but through those stories, there's a lot of information that I gain as well, and it's just fascinating.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope this was fun for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I hope it was a good time for you.
Definitely.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks, Zachary. And folks, check back in 2 weeks. We will have another interesting guest here on Nobody Knows Your Story.
Down a little old country road not far away. Let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from.